Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, debt slicers, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, banker scum. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And let's go to the not-so-good old USA again, and let's talk about Donald Trump and some of his specific appointments. I did one, well, actually, I've done a couple videos now. I did one video initially when Trump was putting his cabinet together, and I asked whether he was putting together a cabinet or a tool shed. And then the last video I did on Trump's appointments, of course, I mentioned the fact that it's billionaires, bankers, and generals. So it's some disturbing trend. And although I don't want to rush to any judgments because it looks like a pretty motley crew with a lot of wild ideas and a lot of potential for danger, I don't want to jump the gun because we shall see. I want to wait and see what the administration actually does before I start really lashing out. But I am intrigued by the fact that Donald Trump has brought on all these bankers, specifically bankers from Goldman Sachs, because of course Trump spent a lot of campaign talking about how Hillary Clinton and the Clintons were under the Goldman Sachs thumb and how the bankers were unfettered during the Obama administration. And yet here we go. Trump's putting together his administration, and he's already got, let's see, 5 people from Goldman Sachs or associated with Goldman Sachs. We got Steve Mnuchin is now the candidate for U.S. Treasury Secretary. We got Gary Cohn who's a top advisor. Anthony Scaramucci, who's a part of the transition team, and Steve Bannon, of course, his advisor. And then just recently we have Jay Clayton, a Wall Street lawyer who represents Goldman Sachs, who's going to head the SEC of all things. So anyway, we got Goldman Sachs firmly entrenched in the Trump administration. And notable that there were only a few people in the Obama administration that had connections with Goldman Sachs, so some of those charges are a little off. But here we have Trump, of course, going on the campaign, railing against bankers, railing against Goldman Sachs, railing against the banker control of the political parties, et cetera, et cetera. And now he gets in the office and he lines up in 5 Goldman Sachs bankers. And so very disturbing. I'm not really happy about this. And particularly because it looks like he's going to be the banker's friend. So in spite of all the campaign rhetoric, railing against the bankers, good populist rhetoric. And the banks like that. Don't kid yourself. They railed against some of the banker bashing back in the day, but they understood when Trump was out there using populist rhetoric against the banks to get elected because they knew what he was doing, and they know he's a friend to them. And in fact, Lloyd Blankfein expects a great Trump presidency now. And that's pretty interesting because, of course, once again, a lot of the banks were having problems with the idea of a Trump presidency, but now they're all lining up because that's what they do. He's president now, so they got to kiss his ass. So that's what we see going on. But then Trump's come out and talked about the quote during the campaign that Dodd-Frank has made it impossible for bankers to function, unquote. So pretty hyperbolic. It's certainly Dodd-Frank has not made it impossible for banks to function. They're functioning just fine in their standard corrupt ways, and in fact, we're probably going to get more corrupt and go back to a lot of their old practices because, of course, Trump is very interested in deregulation. He said so much in that statement. Dodd-Frank has made it possible for bankers to function, unquote. And then, of course, Trump has all these big connections to the banks, particularly because he owes them lots of money. And that's the thing with banks. You remember, if you owe the bank $10,000, you're in trouble. But if you owe the bank $10 million, the bank's in trouble. So that's how it works. So Trump has talked about deregulation. He's talked about going after the Dodd-Frank rule and the Volcker rule. And the whole thing about Dodd-Frank and the Volcker rule is kind of interesting in itself because there's been 5 years of delays. The bankers have basically been buying time, and I assume they are probably hoping that they could just keep stalling until the next administration came into power, and that's exactly what they've done. And so the 5 years of delays have paid off, and there's expectations for huge bank profits, and there already has been. But now there's talk that the Fed will give the banks until 2022 to fully instigate Dodd-Frank and the Volcker rule. So they're betting on gutting it long before it ever gets to that stage. What is that, 5 years off? So anyway, they're going to get 10 years. So it's here we tried to have some banker reform after the banks collapsed the entire global economy 6 or 7, 8 years ago, 9 years ago. I can't losing track now. But they're going to get 10 years for even this minimal reform. And one of the things to remember, too, is that Goldman Sachs is responsible for 1/3 of the Dow's average gains since the election. So Goldman Sachs is really doing well with this Trump push. So they're going to keep supporting this, and things are going to be good for them. The bank stocks have generally been skyrocketing since getting the Trump bump, because they know things are going to be good for them, and they're, you know, there's going to be tax breaks for hedge funds, which are the last people to need it. And bank regulation oversight is going to be gutted. And I'm sorry to say that. I had hopes that maybe there were some policies at Trump that were going to shape up pretty good. And there's a few, you know, audit the Fed's going to be a good thing, and some of these other policies. But overall, it looks like it's going to, at least on paper right now, it's looking pretty bad. You got a whole government that's going to be stocked with bankers again. And needless to say, if they are unfettered and they're already reckless right now, and there's all kinds of incredible risks around the globe in the economy, including in the United States, and left unfettered to take even further risks and have less oversight and deregulated, the banks could run amok and create something even more disastrous than before. And that's been the prediction all along. There's talks about a 50% decline in, next year in the fall. We'll see. They've been talking about that for a long time now. But anyway, things are good for the banks. Things are good for Goldman Sachs. Things are good for Goldman Sachs bankers. Things are good for Goldman Sachs bankers in the Trump administration. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?